When we find ourselves in the presence of toxic individuals, the first step toward protecting our peace is to recognize the toxic influence they have on us. Often, we may feel caught in a whirlwind of negativity, manipulation, or emotional drama, and it's not always easy to identify what's happening. The first challenge, however, is to become aware of the signs that indicate we are dealing with a toxic person. This is the moment when we need to open our eyes and not be afraid to call out toxic behavior for what it is, even if it's uncomfortable or painful. Toxic behavior manifests in many ways, but the most common trait is a consistent and draining presence. A toxic person may not always shout or create visible chaos, but they subtly infect the environment with negativity, gossip, or constant criticism. Their words may never seem overtly aggressive, but they are designed to break down your confidence, cause doubt, and undermine your sense of self-worth. They may make you question your choices, your abilities, or even your value as a person. This constant undermining, often masked as constructive criticism, can leave you feeling confused, insecure, and emotionally exhausted. It's important to realize that this is not normal, it's toxic. When you begin to recognize these signs, it's a wake-up call to take charge of your emotional state and respond with wisdom. Another common trait of toxic people is manipulation. Sometimes toxic people use guilt, shame, or other tactics to control your behavior. They may twist your words or actions to suit their needs, making you feel responsible for their emotions or reactions. This manipulation often leaves you questioning whether you've done something wrong or if you're not meeting their expectations. But the truth is, their need to control or manipulate is not about you, it's about their inability to manage their own emotions or behavior. The sooner you realize this, the sooner you can break free from the cycle of manipulation and regain control over your life. It's also essential to recognize when toxic people bring chaos into every situation they touch. A toxic person can't seem to exist without creating drama, whether it's stirring up conflict between friends or colleagues, constantly complaining about their circumstances, or projecting their unhappiness onto others. They thrive on turmoil. They need the drama to feel significant or validated, and they often feed off the emotional reactions of those around them. When you realize this pattern, it's a sign that you need to distance yourself from the constant emotional roller coaster they try to pull you into. At the same time, it's important to understand that toxic people often rely on our emotional reactions to maintain their hold. They want to see us upset, hurt, or angry because it validates their need for control and attention. Recognizing this is a powerful tool for us because it means we don't have to give them what they want. When we stay calm and composed, we take away their power over us. But recognizing their tactics is only half the battle. The real challenge comes in deciding what to do with this awareness. The truth is, identifying toxic behavior isn't always as easy as it sounds. Sometimes toxic people are in our families, our close circles, or even our workplaces. They may be people we care about or people who've been part of our lives for a long time. This can make it difficult to break free from the negative patterns they create. We may feel a sense of duty to tolerate their behavior, or we may feel guilty for distancing ourselves. However, the key to dealing with toxic people lies in understanding that their behavior is not your responsibility to fix, and it is not something you need to endure for the sake of keeping the peace. It's important to realize that toxic people often feed off your silence or your willingness to allow their behavior to continue unchecked. By allowing them to stay in your life and continue causing harm, you are inadvertently allowing them to control your emotions, your peace, and your happiness. Recognizing this truth gives you the power to take back control. You are not obligated to let anyone, no matter how close they are to you, treat you in a way that causes harm or distress. When you see the signs of toxicity in someone, it is not a sign of failure or weakness to walk away or to set boundaries. In fact, it is one of the smartest things you can do for your own emotional well-being. Being able to identify toxic people is a vital first step in protecting yourself, but the process doesn't stop there. Once we recognize the influence toxic people have, we need to make choices about how we respond. The first step is to stop allowing their toxicity to dictate our emotional state. Our emotions are our responsibility, and we have the power to protect our peace regardless of the chaos they try to create around us. This doesn't mean we shut ourselves off from others or become callous. Instead, it means we develop the wisdom to choose how much access we give to people who consistently bring negativity or harm into our lives. The recognition of toxic behavior also invites us to take a deeper look at our own lives and ensure that we are setting the right boundaries. The goal is not to shut people out, but to protect ourselves so we can engage with others in healthy, loving, and meaningful ways. It is a form of self-care which ultimately leads to stronger relationships, not weaker ones. At the end of the day, recognizing toxic people in our lives is an empowering process. It allows us to choose wisely who we allow to influence us, and it frees us from the destructive patterns that may have previously held us captive. When we stop tolerating toxicity, we can open ourselves up to healthier, more supportive relationships and environments that contribute to our growth and peace. Recognizing toxic behavior is not about labeling people, it's about recognizing patterns and making intentional choices that safeguard our emotional health. It's a form of self-respect and a declaration of our worth. Once we identify toxic people, we are no longer passive participants in our own emotional well-being. We become active agents in creating a life filled with peace, love, and joy. Setting healthy boundaries with toxic people is a powerful and necessary step toward preserving our emotional well-being. Many people mistakenly believe that setting boundaries is an act of cruelty or rejection. But in reality, boundaries are acts of self-love and self-care. When dealing with toxic individuals, the importance of establishing clear boundaries cannot be overstated. Boundaries are not walls that separate us from others. Instead, they are guidelines that protect our peace, keep us grounded, and ensure that our emotional health remains intact. The key to maintaining healthy relationships, whether with friends, family, or colleagues, lies in having boundaries that allow us to be present and engage without sacrificing our own mental and emotional balance. At the heart of setting boundaries is the recognition that we are not responsible for other people's actions, emotions, or reactions. Toxic people often want to create an environment where they have control over how we feel, behave, or react. They might use guilt, shame, or emotional manipulation to break down our defenses, making us feel responsible for their happiness or well-being. But the truth is, we can't control how others behave or how they choose to interact with us. What we can control is how we respond to them, and we do this by setting clear, firm boundaries. It's important to recognize that setting boundaries doesn't mean we love or care for the person any less. It simply means we love and care for ourselves enough to protect our own emotional space. The first step in setting boundaries is understanding what your own needs are. To protect yourself from toxic influences, you must first recognize what drains your energy and causes emotional harm. Is it constant criticism, manipulation, or unnecessary drama? Is it someone who never respects your time or needs? Once you've identified the specific toxic behaviors that affect you, you can begin to clearly define your boundaries. Setting boundaries starts with knowing what is acceptable and what is not. For example, if someone regularly calls you with complaints and negativity, you might set the boundary that you will only engage in positive, solution-oriented conversations. If a person is constantly demanding your time without offering any consideration in return, you might set the boundary that you will only make time for them during designated hours, ensuring that your own needs are met first. Setting boundaries also requires us to communicate those boundaries clearly and with kindness. Toxic individuals often try to push back against boundaries, whether consciously or unconsciously, because they are used to getting their way. They might attempt to guilt trip you, make you feel selfish, or even try to manipulate you into thinking that your boundaries are unreasonable. This is where it becomes essential to be firm yet loving in how you communicate your needs. For example, if someone is constantly demanding your attention during moments when you quiet or personal time, you might calmly say, "I care about you, but I need this time for myself to recharge. I'll be happy to talk or spend time with you after this." There's no need for aggression or defensiveness. Instead, you're simply communicating that your peace and personal time are non-negotiable. However, setting boundaries is not just about what we say, it's also about what we do. In some cases, toxic people may ignore or try to bypass your boundaries, believing that you will eventually give in. This is where consistency is key. It's not enough to simply say, I'm not comfortable with that or I need space. We must also be prepared to reinforce those boundaries with action. If someone repeatedly violates your boundaries, it's important to take a step back and reevaluate the relationship. This might mean limiting your contact with them, reducing the amount of emotional energy you invest in the relationship, or in extreme cases, removing them from your life altogether. The more consistently we enforce our boundaries, the less likely toxic people are to challenge them. Over time, they will learn that you will no longer tolerate behavior that undermines your peace. One of the most difficult aspects of setting boundaries is dealing with guilt. It can be incredibly hard to set limits, especially with people we care about, without feeling selfish or like we are being unreasonable. However, it's important to remind ourselves that setting boundaries is an act of self-preservation, not selfishness. When we allow toxic behavior to go unchecked, we end up sacrificing our own emotional health, which can lead to burnout, anxiety, and even resentment. By setting boundaries, we are not only protecting ourselves, but we are also fostering healthier, more authentic relationships with those around us. When we honor our own needs, we become better able to love and serve others without depleting ourselves. There is also a spiritual aspect to setting boundaries. It can be tempting to believe that we should always put others before ourselves, even if it means sacrificing our own peace. However, the Bible teaches us that we are called to love others as we love ourselves. Mark 12:31. This means that in order to effectively love and care for others, we must first learn to love and care for ourselves. Setting boundaries is a way of honoring the body, mind, and spirit that God has entrusted to us. It is a reflection of wisdom and discernment, recognizing that our well-being is just as important as the well-being of others. When we establish and enforce healthy boundaries, we demonstrate self-respect and we allow ourselves the space to grow in grace, love, and peace. Another important aspect of setting boundaries is recognizing when to walk away. Sometimes, despite our best efforts to set boundaries and communicate our needs, toxic individuals will not respect our limits. When this happens, we must have the courage to distance ourselves from the relationship or situation. Walking away doesn't mean giving up on the person. It means choosing to protect ourselves from further harm. In some cases, this may be a temporary break to allow both parties to cool down and gain perspective. In other cases, it may mean ending the relationship entirely. Remember, the goal is not to punish the other person. It's to ensure that you are taking care of your own emotional health. If someone continually disregards your boundaries and refuses to respect your needs, it may be time to let go for your own peace of mind. Ultimately, setting boundaries is an ongoing process. It requires continual awareness, practice, and commitment to self-care. There will be times when toxic individuals will test your boundaries, and it's essential to remain vigilant. However, the more you practice setting and maintaining your boundaries, the more natural and effortless it becomes. You will find that your relationships will improve and you will have more energy, peace, and joy because you have prioritized your own emotional health. Remember, setting boundaries is not about pushing people away. It's about creating the space to love and care for yourself so that you can love and care for others in a way that is healthy, meaningful, and sustainable. When faced with toxic people, it is natural to feel frustrated, angry, or hurt by their behavior. However, the smartest and most effective response is not to retaliate with anger or negativity, but to respond with wisdom. It may feel counterintuitive, especially when you are emotionally triggered, but responding with wisdom is the key to maintaining your peace and emotional stability. Anger may provide temporary relief or a sense of justice, but it ultimately feeds into the negativity that toxic individuals thrive on. Toxic people want to provoke an emotional reaction from you. And when you give in to their tactics, you allow them to continue controlling your emotional state. Therefore, responding with wisdom is not just a tactic for diffusing conflict, it's an act of reclaiming control over your emotions and your life. One of the most powerful ways to respond to toxic people is by remaining calm and composed, even when they are being provocative or unreasonable. When we remain calm in the face of toxicity, we deny the other person the emotional reaction they are seeking. Toxic individuals often thrive on creating chaos or drama, and they rely on our emotional responses to fuel their behavior. When we don't engage emotionally with their negativity, we take away their power over us. This doesn't mean suppressing our feelings or pretending everything is okay when it's not. It means choosing not to let their behavior dictate our emotional state. It's about recognizing that while we cannot control the toxic person's actions, we can control how we choose to respond. Responding with wisdom also involves choosing to take a step back and assess the situation before reacting. When we are faced with a toxic person, our initial instinct might be to react impulsively, perhaps by arguing, defending ourselves, or trying to change their perspective. However, this is often not productive. In fact, engaging with a toxic person in this way only perpetuates the conflict. Wisdom tells us to take a moment to breathe, gather our thoughts, and evaluate the situation before responding. This pause allows us to gain clarity and respond thoughtfully, rather than react out of emotion or frustration. By giving ourselves that brief moment to reflect, we are more likely to choose a response that aligns with our values and preserves our peace. Another aspect of responding with wisdom is knowing when to disengage. Sometimes the wisest response is not to engage at all. Toxic people often try to drag us into their emotional turmoil, and by engaging in their drama, we only add fuel to the fire. Recognizing when a conversation is going nowhere, when a situation is escalating unnecessarily, is key to protecting our emotional well-being. It takes wisdom to know when to walk away, whether physically or emotionally, from a toxic situation. By disengaging, we preserve our energy and prevent ourselves from being further affected by their negativity. This doesn't mean avoiding difficult conversations or refusing to address issues. Rather, it means choosing not to participate in destructive patterns of behavior. In some cases, responding with wisdom might involve addressing the toxic behavior directly, but in a calm and measured way. This is different from reacting impulsively with anger or frustration. Instead, it's about calmly expressing how the other person's actions are affecting you without attacking or blaming them. For example, instead of saying, "You're always rude and selfish," which would likely escalate the situation, you could say, "When you interrupt me in conversations, it makes it difficult for me to share my thoughts. I would appreciate it if we could have a more respectful dialogue." This approach focuses on the behavior, not the person, and opens the door for more constructive communication. By speaking in this way, we take the high road and demonstrate emotional maturity. We express our needs and set boundaries without resorting to hostility or aggression. Responding with wisdom also means refusing to engage in gossip or speaking negatively about the toxic person to others. It can be tempting to vent to friends or colleagues about the toxic person's behavior, but doing so only perpetuates the cycle of negativity. Gossiping about someone else's toxic behavior not only spreads more negativity, but it also keeps us emotionally tied to the situation. Instead, responding with wisdom involves choosing to rise above the situation and not allow it to dominate our thoughts or conversations. This doesn't mean we should suppress our feelings, but rather that we should find healthier outlets for processing our emotions, such as talking to a trusted friend, journaling, or seeking support from a counselor or spiritual advisor. Moreover, responding with wisdom often requires us to practice forgiveness. Toxic people can hurt us deeply, and it can be hard to let go of the resentment or anger we feel toward them. However, holding on to grudges only weighs us down emotionally. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing or condoning the toxic behavior. Rather, it's about releasing ourselves from the emotional burden of anger and resentment. When we forgive, we free ourselves from the control that toxic people have over our emotions. Forgiveness is an act of self-liberation and allows us to move forward with peace in our hearts. It is important to understand that responding with wisdom doesn't mean allowing toxic people to walk all over us or tolerate behavior that is hurtful or disrespectful. Wisdom involves recognizing when a person's behavior crosses a line and knowing when to set firm boundaries. It's about standing up for ourselves with confidence and dignity without resorting to anger or aggression. Responding with wisdom is not about passivity or letting others take advantage of us. It's about handling the situation with grace, clarity, and emotional strength. Responding with wisdom also involves understanding that we are not responsible for the toxic person's behavior. Toxic people often try to make us feel like we are the ones to blame for their actions or emotions, but wisdom teaches us that we are only responsible for our own behavior. It's important to remember that we cannot control how others act or react, but we can control how we choose to respond. If someone's behavior continues to negatively affect us despite our efforts to respond wisely, it may be necessary to distance ourselves from them in order to preserve our own peace. This is not an act of retaliation or judgment, but rather an act of self-care. Ultimately, responding with wisdom is about cultivating emotional resilience. It's about choosing to rise above the toxicity and not allow it to define us or control us. Toxic people may try to bring us down, but when we respond with wisdom, we are demonstrating our strength and our commitment to living a life of peace, joy, and emotional health. It's about embracing the truth that we are not at the mercy of other people's negativity. We have the power to choose our responses, and we can choose to rise above the chaos. Letting go and trusting in a higher plan is one of the most freeing and empowering ways to deal with toxic people. It can be incredibly tempting to feel like we must fix, change, or control the behavior of toxic individuals in our lives, but the truth is we can't. We can't change their hearts or make them see things from our perspective, and often trying to do so only leads to frustration, anger, and more emotional turmoil. The smartest way to deal with toxic people is to let go of the desire to change them and trust that there is a higher plan at work. This doesn't mean we simply ignore or accept their behavior. Rather, it means we choose to release the situation into the hands of a higher power, trusting that in time, everything will work out as it should. Letting go is about recognizing that we are not in control of everything that happens in our lives, and that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay, it's a relief. When we try to control every situation, especially situations involving toxic people, we often exhaust ourselves. We waste our energy trying to change things that are beyond our control, and in the process, we lose sight of our own peace and joy. By letting go, we release the burden of trying to fix someone else's behavior, and instead, we focus on what we can control, our own reactions and our own emotional health. This doesn't mean we give up on the person or stop caring about them. It means we stop carrying the weight of their actions on our shoulders. Trusting in a higher plan requires faith that the universe or God has a greater understanding of the situation and that everything will unfold as it's meant to. Sometimes when we are in the midst of dealing with toxic individuals, it can feel like we are stuck in an impossible situation. We might feel as though there is no way out, or that we are powerless to change the course of things. But when we trust in the idea that there is a divine purpose at work, we can find comfort in knowing that we don't have to carry the weight of the world alone. There is a bigger picture, and even though we may not understand it in the moment, we can trust that it is working for our highest good. Letting go also means surrendering our expectations. Often when we deal with toxic people, we expect them to change or apologize, and when they don't, we feel hurt or frustrated. But when we release those expectations, we free ourselves from the disappointment and resentment that can come from trying to change someone who is unwilling or unable to change. We don't need the toxic person to change in order to find peace. We only need to change our perspective. By letting go of the need for validation or apology, we give ourselves the freedom to heal and move on, no longer bound by the toxic person's behavior or the weight of our expectations. Another aspect of letting go is understanding that forgiveness plays a key role in our healing process. Forgiveness is not about excusing the toxic person's behavior. It's about releasing the hold that their actions have on our hearts and minds. When we hold on to anger, bitterness, or resentment, we give the toxic person power over us, even if they are no longer in our lives. But when we forgive, we take back that power. We allow ourselves to move forward with peace and grace, unburdened by the pain of the past. Letting go of our need for revenge or justice is one of the most freeing acts we can perform, not for the sake of the toxic person, but for our own emotional well-being. Trusting in a higher plan doesn't mean we simply work past things to get better. It doesn't mean we ignore the toxic behavior or we It's about acknowledging that we can take the necessary steps to protect ourselves, whether that means setting boundaries, distancing ourselves, or even ending the relationship, but that we trust the process. We trust that by removing ourselves from a toxic situation or by setting boundaries, we are allowing space for healing and transformation, whether for ourselves or for the toxic person. Often, the most powerful thing we can do is to simply step back and allow the other person to learn their own lessons while we focus on our own growth and healing. Letting go is also about recognizing that we don't need to have all the answers right now. It's about accepting that sometimes things don't make sense, and that's okay. Life is full of challenges, and sometimes the people we encounter along the way are not meant to stay in our lives forever. They may come to teach us important lessons about ourselves, or they may come to show us the importance of self-respect, boundaries, and self-love. But once we've learned those lessons, we don't need to hold on to the relationship out of a sense of obligation. Trusting in a higher plan means having faith that the people who need to be in our lives will stay, and the people who don't will move on, as they should. The practice of letting go also brings a sense of freedom and peace. When we release the need to control, fix, or change others, we reclaim our emotional energy. We no longer expend precious time and effort trying to force someone to change their behavior or make them see things our way. Instead, we invest that energy in ourselves, our healing, our growth, and our happiness. We take back our power, knowing that our peace does not depend on the actions of toxic individuals, but on our ability to choose our response. Trusting in a higher plan also allows us to step into a space of deep trust and surrender. It's not about being passive or passive-aggressive. It's about recognizing that we are doing the best we can, and that's enough. We can trust that the right people, the right opportunities, and the right circumstances will come into our lives when the time is right. Sometimes we just need to let go and allow things to unfold naturally, knowing that everything is working out for our good, even when it doesn't appear that way in the moment. Letting go and trusting in a higher plan doesn't mean we become complacent or passive. It means we let go of the illusion that we can control everything. We accept that we can only control our own actions, thoughts, and emotions, and that's more than enough. When we trust that there is a divine plan at work, we are able to approach life with a sense of peace and trust, knowing that no matter what happens, we will be okay. We don't need to have all the answers today because we trust that in time the answers will come and everything will work out as it should.